defendant and all counsel. Mr. Nerman, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Arias, I think I got my notes a little jumbled before lunch, but let me then begin. I want to direct your attention to some text conversations you had with Mr. Alexander on the 11th, referring you to Exhibit 449. Review those to yourself, please.
Yeah.
And do you see the day that this text, or as far as the messages that are displayed here, do you see the day and time posted that those began?
Yes, May 11th, and it would be close to 2 in the morning until close to 3, around 3 in the morning. Wait, if I did my math right, it's early in the morning.
And this was the day after the text messages we were just talking about before lunch, is that right?
About 2 days after.
Okay, about 2 days after.
Right.
As you look at these messages, looking at the hours, do you recall, looking at the hours being a little off, do you recall whether these messages took place before or after the recorded phone call we heard last week?
This would have been the day after. So the last text messages were the 9th.
Okay.
The tape was the 10th, and this is the 11th.
So the phone sex conversation that was recorded, that happened on May 10th, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But that would have been the early morning hours of the 10th, not the late night of the 10th, right?
Right, hours after the main text messages.
So this is about 24 hours later, right?
Approximately.
Okay. And do you recognize those messages as being messages you received from Mr. Alexander, referring specifically to 14120 and 6631?
Yes.
As well as message 14121?
Yes.
Move to Exhibit 449.
Objection, lack of foundation. She indicated that these are the messages, but there's also messages from her. She has not identified those. And the same issue that we talked about before.
Mr. Nerman.
Take a look at the rest of these messages. Do you recognize them all?
Yes.
And is that the text message conversation you had with Mr. Alexander around the 10th of May, 2008?
11th. Yes,
11th.
we're going back and forth.
Right. Your Honor, I move to admit 449.
Objection, hearsay.
Approach, please.
without telling me what was said on May 11, 2008, looking at Exhibit 449 and directing you to some of those messages, did he say nice things to you in those messages?
Yes.
Did those make you feel good about yourself?
Yes.
Did it make you, I think your words were, better about continuing the association with him?
Overruled.
Yes. Those are my words.
I'm going to move to admit Exhibit 449, Your Honor.
Usual stipulation or avowal, no objection.
Mr. Nermy.
Yes, Your Honor.
Exhibit 449.
Does your monitor work there, Ms. Arias?
Yes.
Would you be so kind as to read text message 14120 to us?
Honey, I think he meant to say, look beautiful in all your pics.
And that made you feel good?
Yes.
Can you read message 6631 to us?
Thanks, sweetie. You never fail to make me feel beautiful.
And the next one?
Plus, I just got your other pics downloaded, and you are smoking hot in them.
And your response is yeah?
Yay, with a smiley face.
Is that an expression of the fact that you were happy that you had Mr. Alexander's approval for your pictures?
Overruled.
Yes.
It still meant a lot to you on May 11th of 2008, his approval?
Made me feel good.
And that feeling meant a lot to you, right?
It was preferable to the alternative.
The alternative being what?
How I felt when he was not being nice.
Okay. And that goes to the shaking and the fear?
Yes.
That's the alternative? What was the alternative, Miss Arias?
Just the horrible feeling of when he's coming down on me and just feeling like I have to cower.
You still felt like you had to cower 1,000 miles away?
I did.
Miss Arias, I want to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 450. If you could take a look at all those messages, please.
Yes, I remember these very well.
You say very well, why?
Because I remember that whole night pretty well.
Okay. And just so we're clear, that whole night, this is what day is this?
This was, it started the night of May 25th and moved into May 26th.
Okay.
Early.
And have you looked at all the exhibit, ma'am?
Yes.
And does that contain the, both, what that is the interaction between you and two via text message that day?
Yes. During this part of the day.
Okay. And you said you remembered that day well. Without going into what's in the text messages for the moment, what was going on the 25th and 26th of May between you and Mr. Alexander?
I called him. This is the time period where I sent him another pamphlet with those phone numbers on it for some kind of counseling or mental health services. And he got upset. So it started this fight, basically.
Okay. And this fight, did it take place, and we heard earlier in the trial, we heard the instant message interaction you had with Mr. Alexander where he called you a slut, a whore, and a three-hole wonder. Was that part of this fight?
Yes.
And were there phone conversations that day as well?
Yes.
And then these text messages that we've just talked about in Exhibit 450, that was also part of this fight?
This was the start of it.
Okay.
Sort of the beginning of the fight.
Okay. Your Honor, I'm going to move to admit Exhibit 450.
Same objection as before, lack of foundation, impact on the defendant.
Sustained.
Did you feel good when he was saying those things he said to you on those text messages?
No.
Is that the wrath that you feared?
Yes, that was the beginning of it.
Did it make you shake?
Yeah, at first it did. Well, I was asleep actually when some of it started. So.
When you read them, did it make you shake?
Yes, it came through, and each time the phone would beep, it just made my anxiety build because I knew it was going to be. Well, I assumed it was going to be something not nice.
Move to admit Exhibit 450, Your Honor.
With the avowal, no objection.
Exhibit 450 is admitted.
I want to speak with you then about some of the things that were included in his wrath. I want to draw your attention, Ms. Arias, specifically to the text message denoted as 14829. Can you see that on your screen?
Yes.
Okay. Can you read that for us?
Yes. I sent you a response to your dire conversation that I hope you read because you need to read it. Maybe it will spark human emotion in you, something that only seems to exist when it comes to your own problems. But everyone else is just a part of your sick agenda. By the way, your pick comment to Danny Jones makes you look like a pure whore, even more to the people who know you. You should be embarrassed by it. But if he knew what I knew about you, he'd spit in your face. So would everyone else. I have never in my life been hurt so bad by someone. But why do I even say it? Because you don't care. It doesn't serve your evilness.
Before we move off that text message, I want to ask you a few questions. You said I sent you a response to your dire conversation. Was that something that happened verbally, or was that something that happened over some other form of communication?
It was verbal. He wanted me to text it, but I didn't want to talk about his issues in the text messages.
What do you mean his issues?
His sexual attraction to children.
It also says in here, your pit comment to Danny Jones makes you look like a whore, or excuse me, a pure whore. Was that the one regarding man boobs, the Anchorman reference you were speaking of last week?
Yeah, it was a joke.
Okay. Drawing your attention to the next message here, number 14830. You read that to us?
You couldn't get off your lazy butt to read it, could you? That's the sociopath I know so well. It freaking figures.
To your understanding, what's that a reference to?
Well, that's because the text message above that came through, and that time would be around 1 o'clock in the morning. So it woke me up, and I was asleep. And well, first he called me. He sent that and called me. And so when I answered the phone, and I tried to read through the text messages, but I was very groggy and I was disoriented. And so after I shut my phone, I was hesitant to get up anyway, because in order to look at the email he wanted to send me, I had to go into my grandmother's room, turn on her computer, and that would wake her up. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. The bright light from the monitor would wake her up, and she's older, so she has a hard time sleeping as it is. So I kind of lay there for a minute contemplating whether or not to do that, and I was very groggy, so I slipped right back into sleep and didn't get up. So he was mad because I didn't get up and read it.
And he refers to you there as a sociopath. How did that make you feel?
I don't know. He's called me worse things, I thought, so it didn't make me feel good, but it wasn't the worst that he's called me.
Okay. Drawing your attention, if you could, read for us text message 14831.
I don't want your apology. I want you to understand what I think of you. I want you to understand how evil I think you are. You are the worst thing that ever happened to me.
How did that make you feel?
It made me feel not good, I guess. It made me feel yucky, I guess you could say.
Okay. You mentioned, I don't want your apology. Was there an apology text message that's missing here? Did you speak with him? What apology, to your understanding, is he referring to?
I apologize for not getting out of bed and going to read his email.
And how did you do that? Through text message?
It was either text or phone call. I was half asleep, but
Okay.
That's what I apologized for.
And why did you feel the need to apologize for not being able to read his email if it would mean waking up your grandmother? Why did you feel the need to apologize for that?
Well, we were kind of night owls anyway, so I don't think he understood what it would have meant for me to get out of bed and go at this hour right now, and why we get to go look at that email. So I guess, I don't know, I used to be able to turn on my own laptop and get online or talk to him on the phone late at night, but this night I was sleeping and my grandparents were sleeping. So I just felt like I needed to apologize, I guess. I didn't want him to be mad that I didn't get up.
Okay. Sounds like you did a lot because you didn't want him to be mad. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
One last text message in that string referring you to 14832. After you apologize, could you read that one for us?
You are a sociopath. You only cry for yourself. You have never cared about me, and you have betrayed me worse than any example I could conjure. You are sick, and you have scammed me.
Do you know what he means by betrayed him? Did you, to your understanding, what that would mean? If you don't, that's fine.
I do. It has to do with, I promised him that I wouldn't tell anybody about his issues if he promised to get help. And another stipulation I made was that he couldn't stay the night at his friend's house because they have children, and until he got help. And so my understanding was that he did actually end up staying there, and I talked to him about it, and I reminded him that he needs to get help. And I also sent the pamphlet around the same time because he's on the tape fantasizing about anally raping a 12-year-old, and I wasn't going for 12-year-old, I was going for adult, even though, So just all these things, and it was very awkward. I didn't want to put it in text messages. I didn't want that kind of thing, but I think, he just stayed.
Explain further. You said he just what?
Overruled.
He was not happy that I kept pushing him because he wanted me to drop the subject. So back in January, I dropped the subject, assuming that he was going to take the necessary steps that he needed to take, and it was apparent. I didn't feel like he was taking those steps, so I was kind of, I guess you could say, pressuring him, not in a big way, but just urging him, and he didn't like that.
Okay. Now, in May of 2008, you're living at your grandparents' home. We've talked about that. Did you have your own room there?
Yes.
Okay. And where were you working in May of 2008?
May. I think I was working at Casa Ramos by then.
Okay. And this is a Mexican restaurant?
Yes, it's a Mexican family restaurant.
Did you ever refer to it as Margaritaville?
No, I thought that was a country song.
Okay. And what was the status? You talked about a few moments ago in regards to the text messages. We talked about your photography business. What was the status of that? Was it taking flight? Where was it?
My photography, I thought, was taking flight because it was the end of the school year. There were a lot of juniors going into their senior year, and they wanted photographs and portraits. So I had booked some of those and another wedding and also one in the fall. So I felt like it was starting, my calendar was starting to fill up a little bit as far as photography goes.
Okay. So your business is taking flight. You have a job. Why did you still feel the need to interact with Mr. Alexander or try to solve his issues by sending him these pamphlets and having these conversations with him?
Well, solving his issues, I wanted him to get him to solve his own issues, but I cared about him, and you're seeing the worst of it, but in between these times, he was very kind, and he was very loving, and he would apologize, and it seemed to counterbalance it, because there were times when he was so sweet and so nice, and he would praise me and compliment me and make me feel very special, and then he would get pissed off and say things like that.
And at this time in your life, May 2008, we talked about this a while ago, but just specifically late May of 2008, What are your interests, if any, with Ryan Burns?
At that point, I just wanted to get to know him better. I didn't know how we would jive, if we would jive, if our personalities would mesh at all, I never even really, I didn't remember interacting with him in Oklahoma City. I had only seen a few photos of him on his mission in Africa on the internet, on his MySpace page, and that was it.
So, had you and Mr. Burns made any plans to get together?
Yes.
And when was that to take place?
That was to take place, eventually my trip to Utah was finalized for early June.
Okay. And was Utah your only destination, or were you going elsewhere?
I had a lot of destinations.
Okay, well, why don't we kind of go down the list of where you were planning on going?
Okay. Just start?
Yeah, where were you? Well, let's talk about that. Where were you? What was your first destination going to be?
My first destination was going to be Monterey, California.
And when were you planning on leaving on for Monterey?
My plan was to drive to Monterey on the first day, stay the night, get up the next day and go.
No, but what day?
Oh, I would have left Monday morning the 2nd, early Monday.
Monday morning the 2nd, okay. Did anything happen between the text conversations and your plan to leave for the trip?
Yes.
What happened?
At the end of the text conversation you saw led to an online chat conversation that went on for hours, which eventually led to us getting off the phone and off the computer onto the phone, where he wanted more phone sex. And so at that point, after we calmed down from that, he was talking again about coming up, so that he wanted to try this Little Red Riding Hood thing, and we were just determining when that would happen.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Do you remember your grandparents' home being broken into?
I wasn't there, but yes.
Okay. Do you remember about when that occurred?
Well, I understand it occurred May 28th, 2008.
Where were you? Well, we heard testimony earlier that eventually you came to the house that day. Do you recall doing that?
Yes.
And do you recall what day that was?
May 28th.
To your recollection, who called you and advised you that the home had been broken into?
I don't know who called me, because someone had called my sister. We were out of cell phone range, and when we came back into cell phone range, her phone beeped because she had a voicemail, so she checked the voicemail, and that's when she said that what had happened, so we went straight home after that.
And where were you when you received the message that your grandparents' home had been broken into?
We were in Hilt. Hilt is a small town about, I think, like 1/8 of a mile from the border. It's right on the border. And out of cell phone range, we were at a Buddhist monastery way out there.
You say border. To what border are you referring to?
The Oregon border.
So, and how far, refresh our memory, how far was the Oregon border from Wairika?
15, 20 minutes, depending on how fast you're driving.
Okay. So once you got this message, did you go straight back to your grandparents' home?
Yes.
Okay. Did you break into your grandparents' home to steal this gun?
No.
Did you orchestrate or have someone else break into your grandparents' home to steal the gun?
No, I did not.
We saw testimony and pictures about of your grandparents' home and that were taken that day. Do you recall seeing those?
Yes.
Is it correct then you simply could have, had you wanted the gun, you could have just opened the cabinet and taken it?
I guess if I'd known it was there, I could have.
Okay. You did not know that they had this pistol?
No, I knew my grandfather had rifles and shotguns, but I didn't know he had a handgun.
When you learned of the burglary, did you learn that a handgun had been stolen, or did you learn that a handgun had been stolen?
Eventually, yes.
Did you know it at the time?
Well, not when I first arrived, I didn't.
Okay. But did your grandfather or grandmother eventually tell you that this happened?
Yes, my grandmother did.
Okay.
On the same day.
Okay. Now, we talked about how you were planning on going on this road trip. Your first destination was Monterey, eventually Monterey, California, right?
Yes.
And how far was Monterey, California from Wairika, California?
Approximately 7.5 hours.
Okay. And what was the purpose of traveling from Wairika to Monterey? What were you going to do in Monterey?
Monterey was just a stopover because I had friends there, and then I wanted to continue to LA.
Okay. And you say friends there. Who was there?
Matt and Daryl.
Okay. How were you planning to make this trip from Wairika, Monterey, and all the way eventually up to Utah?
My plan was to go to Monterey, then to not Los Angeles, the city, but the area. And then I was maybe going to go to San Diego. That was tentative because John Dixon was inviting me down there, depending on time. I didn't really have a set itinerary. I was just sort of on my road trip going, and I had 3 or 4 days off, and I was glad. So then I was going to cut up through Nevada and Utah. And depending on if I was going from San Diego or LA or Monterey, I was going to either see Lake Powell or Death Valley. I don't know where Death Valley was in relation, so I just MapQuested it. And then head to West Jordan, and hopefully, depending on his schedule or time, we were going to see some national parks there.
Okay. A little more specifically, how were you intending to travel to all these different destinations?
Well, I wasn't intending to hit every single one. I wanted to go to San Diego because Hotel Coronado is on the list, Death Valley is on the list, Lake Powell's on the list, the national parks in Utah are on the list, and that was sort of my travel goal at the time. So showing up and photographing it and walking around a little would have counted as a destination and back on the road.
Back on the road. Getting back to my question then. How were you intending to go to all these destinations?
Driving?
Physically, right. Okay.
Yes.
Did you own a car at the time in May of 2008?
Yes.
And was that the Infiniti we talked about before?
Yes.
Was the plan to drive the Infiniti to all these destinations?
No.
Why not?
I was broke at the time, and I wasn't able to make my car payments. I wasn't also unable to keep up the maintenance that's required as far as getting the transmission service, the oil change, that kind of thing. So my Infiniti wasn't in the best road shape. It's also a sport car with a bigger, more powerful engine, and it's a gas hog. So with all those miles, I didn't want to waste all that gas.
Okay. So what were you going to do then in terms of securing another vehicle to drive?
I wanted to rent a more fuel-economic car.
Okay. And we heard about you renting a car from the Reading Airport. Do you recall doing that?
Yes.
Okay. How did you come to wind up renting a car at this location as opposed to somewhere that might be closer to you?
Well, I think there are car rentals in Wairika, but I went to, it was either Priceline or Expedia or Travelocity or Orbitz, one of those things. One of those travel websites where you put in your information to rent a car. The only nearest cities that were coming up were Medford, Oregon, and Redding, California. So I was going south. Medford's 50 miles north. Redding is south. I have family in both places, so I thought I could drive my car to either location, park it, and get on the road. Okay. So south made more sense.
I'm sorry, what was that last part?
Going south made more sense because I was headed that way.
Tell us then, how did you get to Redding?
I drove my car.
When you made the reservation on the car, do you remember what sort of information you had to provide, be it Orbitz or Priceline or whomever you garnered the car through?
To the best of my recollection, I needed to give my name, probably a phone number, and payment information.
Okay. Do you recall going to the Redding airport to rent the car?
Yes.
Do you recall talking to Mr. Colombo?
Yes.
To your recollection, how long did you spend at that car rental location speaking with Mr. Colombo?
I would say 5 minutes the first time, and then I came back in another 5 minutes maybe.
Okay. Why did you come in the first time?
You mean why did I come back in?
Yes.
I came out and saw it was a red car, and so I came back in and asked him if he had a different color.
Why?
I've always been told not to drive red cars. They get pulled over more often.
You saw the documents Mr. Colombo filled out saying that you claimed that the car was filled with smoke. Is that accurate? Or smelled of smoke, excuse me. Is that accurate?
No, he told police that I exchanged the car.
Speculation as to what he told police.
Sustained.
Miss Arias, when you, not what he told police, why did you tell him you wanted a different car?
Because of the color.
You never complained about smoke in the car?
No, I did not.
Okay. And did he give you another car?
Eventually he did, yes.
Okay. After some period of discussion?
Yeah, he said he's never had that request. I'm sorry.
Sustained.
Were you under the impression that he had to come up with some other reason to issue another car to you?
Yeah, he just...
That's her impression.
Overruled.
What was
Yeah.
the answer to that question, Miss Arias?
Yes, just
Okay.
selected something.
He selected something. Okay. When you rented the car, what did you give him? Did you give him your driver's license?
Driver's license and payment information. A debit card, I think.
Okay. Debit card that had your information on it, right?
Yes.
Okay. And there was some discussion about the color of your hair. We saw pictures earlier referencing you to Exhibit 414. Picture of you and Jewel, right?
Yes.
Now, we heard Mr. Colombo testify that you had blonde hair when you showed up to rent the car. And recall for us again, when was this picture taken?
I believe it was in May, or I don't remember the date. It was in the spring after I moved to Wairika.
Why don't we have you take a look at the back of the information here? without telling us the date.
Judge, I believe that item is in evidence, and so she can't tell us the date, if I remember correctly.
The item in evidence shows that this picture was taken on May 18th, 2008.
I think it said 15th.
15th, excuse me.
Unless I misread.
Does that jive with your recollection?
Yes, it would have been around that time.
Okay. Now, was your hair, to your recollection, substantially similar to this in June, early June, I guess about 2 weeks later, when you rent the car from Mr. Colombo?
Yes.
Now, Miss Arias, after you rent this car, I guess we should clarify, what kind of car did you wind up with?
I believe I wound up with a Ford Focus.
And I'm guessing it wasn't red.
No, it was white.
Okay. And once you have this white Ford Focus, where do you go?
I went back to my brother's house where my car was parked and I took a nap.
Do you remember about what time of day this was when you, well, after you took a nap, do you remember about what time of day it was when you got on the road?
Late morning, I think.
And on this trip, as you left Redding, California, did you have a gun with you?
No.
Did you have a knife with you?
No.
You have a cell phone with you?
Yes.
This Helio that we've seen earlier?
Yes.
And did you have a charger with you?
I did.
Okay. So tell us what happens next. You've got your car, you've taken a nap. What do you do?
I hit the road, Interstate 5 South. I forgot I was supposed to meet Gus Searcy in San Jose as well, if the time permitted. But I was very tired. I'd stayed up all night talking with Travis. So I didn't make it to see Gus. I pulled over somewhere. I think it was just in one of the little towns south of Sacramento or just north. I think it was in Corning. And I slept for a while in a McDonald's parking lot. And then I woke up in the afternoon and got back on the road and kept driving until I reached, well, I was going to go to Monterey, but Matt was in Santa Cruz, so he said, meet me in Santa Cruz. So I went to Santa Cruz.
Okay, and where is Santa Cruz relative to Monterey?
It sits on the north part of the Bay Area. I mean, not the Bay Area, the Monterey Bay.
Okay. So close to Monterey then?
It's pretty close.
Okay. You mentioned that you spoke with Travis. This would have been on the night of the 1st, is that right?
Yes, actually it was into the early morning of the 2nd.
Okay. And without telling us exactly what was said, what was the subject matter of that conversation?
What really stands out is we talked a lot about Gordon Hinckley. He was a former president of the church who had passed away that year.
Did that conversation lead to any phone sex?
No.
Did, to your understanding, or did you ever convey to Mr. Alexander that you were going to see Matt and going on this trip to Monterey?
He knew I was going on the trip, yes. And I don't know if I told him about Matt or not.
Okay. When you had this conversation with him about Gordon Hinckley, did you advise him that you were in the midst of this trip or that you were on your way to Monterey?
He knew I was on my way to Utah.
Okay. Was Monterey one of those, the fact that you were going to Monterey, one of those things that you wanted to keep a secret from him, or did it just not come up?
No. I mean, no, not a secret. I don't remember if it came up or not. He knew I was going to head south first and then cut up through Nevada and go to Utah.
Okay. So did you meet Matt?
Yes. And his friend.
What's that?
And his friend.
Okay. And do you remember about the time of day that you arrived in Santa Cruz?
It was evening and it was dark. Not too late because there were still restaurants and bars open.
So what did you do where did you meet Matt and his friend?
To my recollection, it's a kind of a bar and lounge restaurant called the Red Room.
Okay. And what did you do at the Red Room?
We sat around, had appetizers, and then we headed to a karaoke bar.
Okay. Just so we're clear, was the purpose of this completely social, or was there any romantic interest in Matt at that point in time?
No, there hadn't been any romantic interest for years and years at that point. We were just friends.
Because you broke up with Mr. McCartney in what year?
2001.
Okay. So 7 years later, you're still friends with Mr. McCartney, right?
Yes.
Okay. So after you go to the karaoke bar, what do you do next?
At that point, I follow him and his friend back to his apartment in Monterey.
His being who? Matt's or his friends?
It was an apartment. It was his friend's parents' house. They lived in one portion of it, and there was an apartment kind of sectioned off that he and his friend rented.
Did you spend the night there?
Yes.
We saw earlier in this trial some banking transactions that you engaged in at a Washington Mutual. Do you remember seeing those?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the things that became clear as it looked like, and maybe you can explain it to us, it looked like you had more than one bank account with him. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you explain that to us?
Yes. After moving to Eureka, I opened a business checking account in addition to my personal checking account that I already had for over a year.
Okay. So these checks that you were writing back and forth, what was the purpose of you doing that in Monterey?
Oh, in Monterey? Well, I didn't do it in Eureka because when I left town, it was way too early. The banks weren't open. I didn't do it in Redding because I didn't live in Redding, so I didn't know where there would be a Washington Mutual. I lived in Monterey for over a year, so I knew where the banks were there because I banked there and in Carmel while I lived there.
Okay, so what was the purpose of, we saw the receipts and the checks. What was the purpose of moving the money back and forth between accounts?
My business made no money, so I sort of borrowed money from myself for my business. And so by doing that, I wrote myself a check and put money into the account so that I could use that money while traveling, because part of the reason that I was going to LA was for the photography, so I would be able to write off part of that trip. And part of the reason I was going to see Ryan was also for prepaid legal, so I could write off part of that trip as well. And my business tax write-offs, I was trying to keep in that account to keep it organized.
Okay. So you could have just pulled cash out of the bank too, right?
I could have, yes.
Okay. Based on the receipts we saw and those sort of things, you had several $100s, at least between those two accounts. Is that right?
I guess it was under 1,000. I don't think it was
Okay.
too much.
All right. In terms of payment for anything you might need, how are you intending to pay for the things that you might need along this trip? Meaning cash, meaning check, meaning debit card? What was the plan?
Cash or debit, not check.
Okay. And how much cash did you keep with you typically?
Just for emergency purposes, over 100. Not a whole lot. I think maybe 160, 80. I don't know. It was close to 100.
Okay.
Something, just in case.
After you spend this time with Mr. McCartney, do you visit anyone else in Monterey?
Yes, the next morning I swung by Daryl's apartment in Pacific Grove, which is right next to Monterey, and hung out with him and Jack for a little while.
Okay. And just in case anyone's forgotten, who is Jack to Daryl?
Jack is his only son.
So, do you recall, you said you had breakfast with them, is that right?
Yes, we had omelets.
Okay. And how long did you spend with Jack and Daryl that morning?
Oh, I'd say half hour. We were just hanging out. Jack was getting ready to go to school, and we were just enjoying each other's company.
Okay. And this would have been, do you remember what day this was? Was this the morning of the 3rd or the morning of the 2nd?
I think it was the morning of the 3rd.
Okay. Did you borrow anything from Mr. Brewer while you were there?
Yes, I borrowed his gas cans.
And how many gas cans did you borrow from him?
2.
Why did you borrow 2 gas cans from Mr. Brewer?
So that I could, well, gas in Wairika at that time was $4.78 a gallon for regular unleaded. This is 2008. It's very expensive. All gas in California is a little more expensive because they have stricter regulations. So going to Nevada and Utah would have been cheaper. So I wanted to fill it up.
You didn't tell him keep this a secret?
No.
Okay. When you were having breakfast with Daryl and Jack, do you remember telling Daryl that you were going to go to Mesa?
I had no plans to go to Mesa at that point, so no, I wouldn't have told him that.
Okay. After this, after you were going to leave Daryl's home, or apartment, excuse me, where were you planning on going next?
To Salinas.
And what was in Salinas?
I wanted to get my nails done so they looked good because I was going to go see Ryan.
Okay. Did you end up going to Salinas?
Yes.
And where is Salinas relative to these other towns? Is this a nearby town or?
Salinas is probably, I think, 20-something miles from Monterey. It's not far.
Okay. Is north, south, east, or west?
It is east. It would have put me on a better highway, too, to go south.
What's that?
It would have taken me to Highway 101, too, because Monterey is Highway 1, and for traveling distances, you don't want to do Highway 1.
Well, let me ask you this before we get on to what happened in Salinas. What was, assuming Salinas wasn't the ultimate destination, was the plan to go to Salinas and then straight to Utah, or were you going to go somewhere else after Salinas?
I went to Salinas, had to wait because there was a wait at the nail salon, got my nails done, and then drove to Pasadena.
Okay. So Pasadena was the ultimate destination for you that day, right? Or at least it was one of your next stops?
That area. I was looking to hook up with Daryl's sister because she just had a baby, and I was trying to add infants to my portfolio.
You mentioned being in Salinas and having to wait at the nail salon. Did you go anywhere else while you were in Salinas?
I think I did, but it escapes me right now.
Okay.
Sorry I didn't sleep last night. My memory's shot.
Check. Not responsive.
Sustained. Yes, the response is stricken. The jury is ordered to disregard the last response.
Did you wind up meeting with Daryl's sister?
No.
Why not? What happened?
She didn't return my calls. It was something we had tentatively planned, and she never returned my calls. She did, but it was the next day. So it was too late.
And when you were calling her, was this from Salinas, or were you in Pasadena? Where were you when you were calling her?
I think I called her once the day before I left Wairika to remind her that I was coming down, and then again as I got closer to Southern California, and then again when I was in Pasadena, I think.
Now we're referring to as Daryl's sister. What's her name?
Laura?
Okay. So you make attempts to call Laura. You don't succeed in making contact with her, at least that day. What do you do? What happens next?
At that point, I was going to just hit the road and drive up toward Utah, probably crash somewhere in between.
Okay, you mentioned earlier that there was a possibility that you were going to go to San Diego. What happened there? Is there a reason? Did you end up going to San Diego?
No, San Diego was out at that point.
Why?
It got late, and sometimes I try to cram more things in that is realistic in my trip, thinking I can just do it because I've done road trips all my life, and I just figured cram more in, and San Diego wasn't feasible because it was much farther down.
Okay. So you're in Pasadena, and you decide the next step in your journey is to start going to Utah. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So what do you do in Pasadena to prepare for going to Utah?
I went to Starbucks. I went to, I think it was Arco, because they had cheaper gas. I filled up the tank, and I filled up the gas cans also.
Okay. You said you went to Starbucks. Did anything of note happen at Starbucks when you were in Pasadena?
Yes.
What was that? Describe it for us.
I went in, there was a big wait. It was a long line. It was kind of a busy Starbucks. I got a strawberry frappuccino, and as I was walking back out to my vehicle, I noticed some skaters hanging around near there, and they were all skating off, kind of laughing as I was walking toward my car.
Did you see any damage to your car?
No.
Okay. So at this point in time, you have your car full of gas, you have your gas cans full of gas, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the plan is to go to Utah, right?
Yes.
Okay. And is this, we heard testimony earlier that you had called Mr. Burns and told him you were on your way to Utah, right? Do you recall that?
Yes, right before I had gotten on the freeway.
Okay. Was it your intent at that point in time to go to Utah?
Yes. Maybe Death Valley first, but in that direction.
Did you go directly to Utah after you talked to Mr. Burns?
No.
Why not?
I had been talking to Travis intermittently throughout that time, and the weeks prior when he discovered that I was going to Utah, he started saying, "Why are you going to Utah? Why are you going to Utah when you're going there this summer?"
Sustained.
Was Mr. Alexander questioning why you were going to Utah?
Yes.
Was it your understanding that he didn't want you to go to Utah?
I don't know. I know he wanted me to go somewhere else, but I don't know if not Utah. I don't know how he felt about that.
What's that?
I know he wanted me to go see him, but I don't know that he was, I don't know how he felt about Utah, except that he was suspicious of it.
Okay. You felt as if he was suspicious of Utah and he wanted you to come see him.
Yes.
And you say these are conversations you'd been having periodically throughout the course of these days on your vacation. Is that right?
Prior to the road trip and during.
And what?
During.
Okay. Did you speak on a daily basis during the road trip?
We spoke on the 2nd and the 3rd. Yes.
Okay. So, going back to what we were talking about earlier, you've got the car full of gas and the gas cans. You're going to Utah. You tell Ryan you're going to Utah. Why do you not go straight to Utah?
The very last time I called Travis, it was kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. He had been very sweet. He had been guilting me, kind of making me feel bad that I was taking this big trip and that I wasn't going to see him. And we had been trying to hook up, and he kept being busy, so he had to postpone his plans to come to Northern California. Since I was driving south, he wanted me to come to Mesa. I told him no the first few times. During one conversation, he became angry. During the others, he stayed calm, but he has this way of like talking in this really sweet voice, kind of like baby talk, and making me feel guilty. And he sounded very sweet. And so when I called him one more time, it was just like, all right, I'm going. So I went.
Okay. Did you ever call Ryan Burns to say, well, I'm not going to be up there, I'm going to be late, anything of that nature?
Prior to calling Travis and deciding to go to Mesa, I called Ryan and let him know that my phone was dying. So I wanted to turn off the battery to preserve the juice, turn off the phone to preserve the battery. And he said, that's fine. So I had started to turn my phone off, but then I called Travis one more time.
Objection, no response. Did she tell him?
She explained what she did. What did you do after you called Mr. Burns?
I started to look for the freeway, and as I was calling Travis.
Okay. Did you, during the last phone conversation with Mr. Alexander in Pasadena, did you advise him that you were coming to Mesa?
That final phone call I did, yes.
And we had talked earlier when you left Redding, California, that with the rental car, that you had a car charger with you when you started off to Monterey. Was that car charger not with you when you were in Pasadena?
I couldn't find it. I called Matt to see if I'd left it at his house. He didn't answer. I called Daryl to see anything, if I brought it there, if there was one there. He didn't answer.
Okay. So you couldn't find it?
I couldn't find it. And my battery was getting low. I didn't want to be without cell phone service or gas in the middle of nowhere driving across the desert in Nevada.
Okay. When you left Pasadena for Mr. Alexander's home in Mesa. Did you have a gun with you?
No.
Did you have a knife with you?
No.
What color was your hair?
Kind of like an auburn brown, I'd say.
Didn't stop to dye it along the way?
No.
What time in the evening, to your recollection, did you advise Mr. Alexander that you were going to come to Mesa?
What time in the evening?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't remember precisely, but it would have been somewhere after 8 and somewhere before 10 p.m.
Based on your conversation with him, did you have the understanding that he would be expecting you sometime that night or the next morning?
Yes, he said he would wait up.
And how long a drive? You told us earlier that you'd driven out to Travis's home before. Do you know how long a drive it is from Pasadena to Mesa?
I estimated it to be about 6 hours.
Okay. And this vehicle you were using, do you recall how far you were getting on a tank of gas?
No, but it seemed to go really fast by the way I was driving.
Okay. Between Pasadena and Mesa, did you need to stop for gas?
Yes,
Okay.
a few times.
And did you buy gas or did you use the gas that was in your cans?
No, I bought gas.
Okay. And how did you buy gas?
I bought gas. I had to stop at Desert Center. I bought gas there. And then I had to stop again in Buckeye. And I got gas there. I think at the Shell.
And how did you pay for that gas?
I don't remember. I mean,
Okay. So you stopped for gas twice?
yes.
Okay. So tell us, do you remember about what time you arrived in Mesa?
It was still dark, but it was early morning, maybe around 4-ish.
And is this on the 4th of June, 2008?
Yes.
When you pull up, did you go to Mr. Alexander's home?
Yes, I did.
When you pulled up to Mr. Alexander's house, where did you park your rental car?
I parked it in the same spot I always parked the car when I went to his house, which was the center spot in the driveway.
Do you recall there being other cars in the driveway?
I don't remember specifically. I wasn't really paying attention to that.
Okay. When you pull up to the house, what do you do next?
Well, it was that time of the night, so I went around to the side, into the side entrance, like I always went. Into the backyard, into the garage, and through the laundry room, and then into the house.
Okay. Did you have any luggage with you?
Yes.
And what did that consist of?
I had brought a suitcase, a backpack, my purse, and my laptop.
And you say suitcase. Is this a big suitcase, a small bag? What did you have with you?
It's a suitcase, but it's like a carry-on size. It's not really big.
When you went into the home, did you bring these items with you, or did you leave them in the car initially?
I think he came out and got them for me, so I just went inside.
What's that?
I just went inside.
Okay. When you arrived in Mr. Alexander's home, did you have a gun with you?
No.
Did you have a knife with you?
No.
You were just telling us, you said you walked the house through a side gate. Is that right?
Yes, the backyard.
Okay. Was that typical of how you would enter the home?
Only at night because he locked the front door. I mean, I had a key, but I didn't have one this time because after moving back to Wairika, I took it off my key ring.
Okay. Why wouldn't you just knock on the front door?
I had always just come and gone without knocking, so especially when I was expected. I don't know. It was just
Okay.
easier to just walk in.
All right. And did Travis greet you at the door?
No.
Describe for us what happened when you entered the home.
I came into the house, and after leaving the laundry room, you go left, and his office is on the right. So the light was on and the door was open, so I peeked in there, assuming he was in there, and he was.
What was he doing?
He had his back to me, and he was on his laptop watching music videos or something on YouTube.
Okay. Did he see you initially?
No.
You were still expected in Utah about, 11 that following morning?
I didn't name a specific time, just sometime Wednesday. That was my goal.
Well, when you talked to Ryan Burns, you told him about 12 hours. Is that right?
I didn't know how long it would take to drive to West Jordan, or if I would even stop on the way to see another place on the list first.
Okay. You got to Mr. Alexander's home. He's in the office. You say watching YouTube videos, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is he by himself?
No, he's with Napoleon.
Okay. And Napoleon is whom?
His dog.
Saw Mr. Alexander on his computer sitting in his office with his back to you. Did you shoot him?
No.
Stab him?
No.
What happened?
I thought he looked cute sitting there at the computer, and he was watching really dumb videos. He was just sitting there, so I just stood in the doorway looking at him for a minute. And Napoleon was laying down, so he didn't really notice me at first. And then after standing there for like maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute, Napoleon noticed me and he barked and came over, and I petted him, and that's when Travis turned around and got up out of his chair and came over to greet me.
You said silly videos. Could you describe these for us? Did you see them or?
To the best of my recollection, they were like people, but they had boxes or something on their heads, or foil, some kind of foil all over their bodies and on their heads or something. I'm trying to remember the best as I can.
Okay. So, what happens when Mr. Alexander sees you there?
He got out of his chair and came over to the doorway. I was inside the room now, but just still standing by the door.
Okay. Without telling us what he said, does he say anything to you?
Maybe he greets me. I remember more what he did rather than what he said.
What's that?
I remember more what he did rather than what he said.
Okay. Well, what did he do?
He had a big smile on his face and he kissed me on the lips.
Would you describe this kiss as a romantic kiss?
Definitely romantic.
Would it be a sexual kiss?
With his body language, in addition to that, maybe. Yeah, but the kiss was very warm and kind of sensual, but not overly passionate or anything.
When you said it was sexual based on his body language, what do you mean by that?
He had his hands around my waist, sort of on the top of my butt, and he was pulling me into his body.
At that point in time, did he say anything to you that indicated he wanted to have sex?
I don't recall anything specific at that moment in time.
Okay. So he greets you with this kiss and this contact. What happens next?
He wanted to show me more YouTube videos, so we watched some of those for a little while, and then we went into the living room. He had just gotten a brand new punching bag since I'd moved. I hadn't seen it.
Well, let's back up a bit. These YouTube videos that he was showing you, you mentioned the people dancing with boxes in their head. Was it more similar videos, or was it something different?
They were similar. I don't remember all of them.
And you mentioned this punching bag. Where was this located?
It was on the tile in the, I guess it would be called the family room or living room, near the kitchen. It's all an open floor plan.
Okay. And well, tell us what happens when he's showing you this punching bag.
He was really proud of it, something he had just purchased, and he was punching it, showing off.
When he punched it, did that frighten you?
I mean, I think something had crossed the back of my mind, but he had been very nice, so I wasn't overly concerned about it, but he could punch it and send it flying a few feet over across the tile, and then punch, and he would follow it around the room, and he could punch it that way, and it just kept moving and moving and moving.
What do you mean, something in the back of your mind?
Because he's very strong.
But you also said, but he'd been very nice.
Right.
So when you saw him hitting this bag, was there a part of you that was scared?
Probably a little apprehensive, but he was in a good mood, so I brushed it off.
Okay. So after he punches this bag in the hallway outside the office, what happens next?
We went into the kitchen. I got some water. I wanted to go to sleep. I was exhausted from driving. So we stayed in the kitchen a few minutes. He seemed a little disappointed that I wanted to sleep, but not in a bad mood or anything.
Well, did he while you were in the kitchen, did he indicate a desire to have sex with you?
Yes, insinuated. It wasn't direct, but it was already implied.
And you, from what you're telling us, you didn't want to because you were too tired, right?
No, I wanted to go to sleep.
Okay. At the point in time when you're going to sleep, you mentioned your luggage. Where are all these items? Are they still in your car, or they made their way into the house?
Eventually they made their way into the house. I don't remember what point, but he went and got it for me.
Okay. Before you went to sleep?
Yes.
Okay. When you went to sleep, where were you? Did you and Travis sleep in the same room that night?
Yes,
And which room was that?
his bedroom.
Okay. When you were interacting with Travis when you were in the home, did you ever get any indication from him whether or not anyone else was in the home?
After we went in the bedroom, I think I asked if his roommates were home because it's an indication of how quiet or how loud we have to be.
Based on that, was it your understanding that you were the only two in the home, or were you of the understanding that his roommates might be home?
There was somebody else home, and I don't think all of his roommates were home.
Okay. So do you remember about what time you and Mr. Alexander went to sleep that morning?
Somewhere around 5:30. It was starting to just get light out a little bit.
Do you both, you said you slept in his bedroom. Did you both sleep on his bed?
Yes.
Do you remember who woke up first?
I did.
Do you remember about what time of the day that was?
I woke up around 12:30, and laid there for a while because he was still sleeping.
Okay. So Mr. Alexander was sleeping in the bed next to you, right?
Yes.
And your bags were in the home, right?
In the bedroom.
In the bedroom. Did you get up and grab a gun and shoot him?
No.
Did you grab a knife and stab him in the bed?
No.
What happened?
I laid there for a while with Napoleon, Travis sleeping, snoring very lightly, and then he woke up around 1 o'clock, and we got up at that point.
Okay. You say that you got up. You mean Travis woke up?
Yes.
How long, if you could estimate for us, were you awake before Travis woke up?
It felt like 20 or 30 minutes.
Okay. Apart from laying there with Napoleon, did you do anything else in those 20 or 30 minutes?
Just laid there, awake.
Okay.
I think I went to the bathroom or something.
Okay. So based on what you're telling us, if you woke up about 12:30, Mr. Alexander would have woke up around 1 in the afternoon. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. When he woke up, what did you and Mr. Alexander do?
We engaged in sex.
When you say you engaged in sex, did Mr. Alexander, when he woke up, did he express a desire to have sex with you?
Yes. Not immediately. He got up, brushed his teeth, that kind of thing.
Okay. When you went to Mesa, did you have the expectation, or were you assuming that when you went there, that part of the activity would be to have sex with Travis?
Yes.
Why did you have that impression?
because it was just our thing at that time. It was pretty obvious. I wasn't going to go there, stay the night, and not do that, I guess.
Why not? You weren't dating at the time.
I wasn't sleeping with anybody else at that time.
What do you mean by that? Because it doesn't necessarily mean that you had to be sleeping with him, does it?
No, but he was the only person I'd been with for the last 2 years, so, or almost 2 years. So it still felt like, I don't know, just something I was used to.
Something you were supposed to do?
Used to.
Did you feel like it was something you were supposed to do?
Yeah. I mean, since I'd showed up.
Ladies and gentlemen, 3:20 in the jury room. Please remember the admonition. You are excused.
Please stand for the jury.
Jury has left the courtroom. Miss Arias, you may stand down. We are in recess.